Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your concerns, your questions, your takes, and ultimately your comments about tennis and other things. I've posted in the YouTube community tab on the home page of my channel. I've also tweeted where you can follow me at Gill_Gross is the handle. This will wrap up Australian Open 2021 coverage. It's always a good way to do so. I've thrown so much content your way over the last 2 weeks now 3 weeks. And now it's kind of a chance to debrief and interact with you guys, which I always enjoy very much. A lot of good comments in here. And by popular demand, I hear you guys on YouTube saying that I need to put up the comments. That way you can skip ahead to the next one. So I have done that. So let's get started. YouTube comments first, then I'll get to Twitter at the end. First one comes from Sunflowers of Inferno. They say, I know we all talk about Dominic Thiem being a physical monster. However, I have seen that every time he plays a long physical match, he becomes completely exhausted or injured in the next match. Examples are RG 2020, AO 2020, AO 2021, Tour Finals, etc. Nole and Rafa at 34 look much more fit than Thiem. So do you think that Thiem is really the physical monster everyone portrays him to be? Or do you think that he's already starting to decline at the young age of 27? Well, let's go through those examples real quick just to kind of address them. RG 2020 would be the quarterfinal loss to Diego Schwartzman. And then Australian Open last year would be the 5-set final against Djokovic, where I'm not sure if it's a completely on-point characterization to say he got exhausted, but he lost in the 5th set. And then this last Australian Open was the third-round defeat to Grigor Dimitrov, which I'll get into in more detail. And then the Tour Finals, it was the final against Medvedev. I think that there's no denying in that match. He certainly got tired in that match and ultimately lost to Daniil Medvedev. Tour Finals, I think, is a really difficult physical test for players to play every single day against a top 8 player. And Medvedev by the end there, Thiem by the end there was worn down for Medvedev. So I think your larger point is kind of true, which is that we like to regard Thiem as someone who is one of the fittest players on tour. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but if you're observing here that he's not necessarily a marathon man, I think you're correct. Now, in the most important match of his life, he did outlast his opponent. And Alexander Zverev started cramping, and not to say that Thiem was physically at 100% by the end of that match. I don't think he was by any means, but he held up better than his opponent. And of course, I'm talking about the US Open final against Alexander Zverev. So I do want to throw that in there. Again, I think overall, you're correct. Thiem is a physical monster when it comes to his power, when it comes to his strength, and how he packages that with his speed. And that, in that respect, he really reminds me of kind of a prime Rafael Nadal, someone who's able to have an immense amount of mobility around the court, but packages it with an unbelievable amount of power off the ground. So that's part of physicality. But then, of course, the other part of physicality is how long can you last? And certainly Dominic Thiem has not been a model of endurance in some of these matches. So what's the takeaway here? Well, I think that his game requires a tremendous amount of energy, and I think that factors in. But ultimately, I think it's a pretty good observation, and I can't really disagree with it other than it's a little bit nuanced because, again, he is still a physical monster, even if he's not a marathon man. Now, I think if you go example by example, though, Tour Finals, I don't like to read too much into the year-end final. Australian Open 2021, I think he was injured here. I think he had an injury, and I don't want to really hold that against him. AO 2020, not sure he was exhausted. Roland Garros 2020, I think he was exhausted coming into the tournament. And I think it was more mental than physical, just as much mental as physical. So I can drum up an excuse for you in pretty much every single one. Do with that what you will. I don't think it's a bad observation, but I also think that it would probably be inaccurate to say that he has an endurance problem. I think that would be a little bit too far the other way. Ashwin Kumar, now that Novak has won on hard, what does he have to do to win on clay versus Thiem/Nadal? Is that even possible given this stage in his career? Should he prioritize Wimbledon/Olympics? I'm going to give you kind of the same answer. After Nadal beat Djokovic in 3 sets at the French Open final in 2020, I was kind of getting the same thing. Oh, what does this mean for when he plays Djokovic on hard courts? And my answer was kind of, I don't know if it means anything. I don't know that. I don't think this changes much. And I don't think that this hard court triumph for Novak changes much about his prospects on clay, just like they didn't in 2019. What does he need to do to win on clay versus Thiem/Nadal is the question. It's going to be harder. It's just going to be harder for him. He does not have the same kind of advantages in the serve return dynamic. In fact, he has kind of a disadvantage. When the ball slows down, Thiem and Nadal have a tendency to have success being more aggressive on the return, and that's kind of taken away from Djokovic. So that's a dynamic that flips. Thiem has a lot more time and can hit through Djokovic, and his footwork is challenged, I think, a lot more when it comes to the height of the ball. His flat strokes don't penetrate as much. The heavy topspin bothers him a lot more. It's just going to be harder. I don't think that Novak, here's my point on this. I don't think that Novak is going to do anything that is going to change the fact that it's going to be a harder task for him to beat Thiem and Nadal on clay. He's not going to alter his game. He's not going to shift something that's going to really change that fact. It's just technically he has hurdles. Just like technically Nadal and Thiem have hurdles against Djokovic on a quicker surface. There are technical hurdles. I don't think that's going to really change. Should he prioritize Wimbledon/Olympics? I think he already does. Again, I do think that the Olympics are going to be the main priority for him this year. I don't really know exactly what that looks like other than scheduling, but I think he will prioritize the Olympics. This one from Dalia. Hi, Gill. This might be a silly question, but I was wondering, how do you manage to be or come across as so unbiased, especially when it comes to the big three? How come you've never become a huge fan of one of them in particular? Do you never get super nervous before a match or super happy or sad after someone wins or loses? Or did you only get emotionally involved when it came to David Ferrer? Well, I definitely think that being a supporter of David Ferrer, and again, I think that players like Ferrer were part of the reasons why I like tennis in the first place, because as a shorter athlete who played other sports like baseball, for example, people like Ferrer showed me that not that I ever thought I was going to be a top 10 player in the world. Don't get me wrong. But players like Ferrer showed me that my height was not going to get in the way of becoming a good player. And that's why I gravitated towards players like Ferrer, and also just really appreciated how hard he worked on the court. And that's what got me behind him. And that's why I really had a connection with Ferrer, right? Being a Ferrer fan was definitely the reason why, before I ever did YouTube, why I was not a big fan of anyone in the big three. With that being said, what has really, it would be, look, the best thing I can explain here is when you do what I do, when I am previewing and analyzing match after match after match, it really takes the fan away from you. It sucks it out of you. It just has that effect. And it'll be the same thing, um, if you're a fan of a team and then you start to cover them and you sit in the press box, right? Let's say you sit in the press box and you have to not cheer because there's no cheering in the press box. Your body is literally conditioning itself, unconditioning itself to not cheer when something happens, when normally you would cheer, right? If you were a diehard fan of, I'm just going to say the New York Rangers, my favorite hockey team. I love the Rangers. I yell when they score, right? If I had to cover them and I had to sit in the press box and suddenly when the Rangers scored, I didn't get to yell, that would literally change my mindset. And I think a psychologist could explain to me exactly why, but I would get conditioned to not get excited when they score just by sitting in the press box and not cheering when they score. Does that make sense? So when I watch these tennis matches and I have to try to objectively figure out what's going on here and try to answer, there's no time for me to cheer. There's no time for me to root, and when I'm making predictions, again, it would just be an impediment if I had some kind of emotional attachment. It would be very hard for me to do my job correctly. It would. So it's not difficult, to not be a fan. And I'll end here. I root for who I pick. So don't get me wrong. I'm not watching a match. Sometimes I'm watching a match and I literally couldn't care less. Sometimes I'm watching a match and maybe I care a little bit, but not that much who wins. But most of the time I'm watching a match and I am rooting for my prediction to be correct. Like, doesn't that make sense? Right? I just want to be right. I'd rather be right than wrong. So it's generally as simple as that. And you can pretty much assume that I don't care that much if I'm wrong. So I'm not going wild or anything as I'm watching a tennis match here, but you can pretty much assume that whatever I say is going to happen, I would like that to happen. And that's just because I hope I'm right. So to that point, just to take it one step further, imagine trying to do that and being a fan. Imagine if I loved if I loved Nadal, right? I was a huge Nadal fan, but then I picked Djokovic and then I watched them play. That would be weird because then I would be rooting for myself to be wrong, right? It wouldn't make sense. So in short, doing YouTube has detached me from fandom. The process of this has detached me even further. So it started as a Ferrer thing, and now it's completely long gone. And that's what I'll never be a Tsitsipas fan. I'll never be a Zverev fan. I'll never be a Medvedev fan. It won't happen as long as I do this because it just won't. This one from Andrew. What makes Andy Murray more successful than the rising generation? Zverev, Tsitsipas, and Medvedev, etc. Well, first of all, we have much more data to work with when it comes to Andy Murray. And I do think it's a good thing to remember that Murray did not win his first major until he was 25 years old at the 2012 U.S. Open. And you can talk about the level of competition, which I believe for Andy Murray was a lot higher than it is for Zverev, Tsitsipas, and Medvedev, who are getting what I believe is post-prime versions of Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer. I do not believe that they are better than they were in 2008 through, again, Federer. It differs for all of them, but I'll just say 2008 through 2016. I believe that Murray got a more difficult version of Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer, without a doubt. So with that being said, I think you have to go case by case, and I don't think it's fair to say that Murray is guaranteed to be more successful than those three. I really don't. Remember, I think that all three of them have the potential to win more than 3 slams. All of them. Every single one. So we'll just have to see what happens. I'm not predicting that all three of them equal Murray. In fact, that would be highly unlikely. But I'm just saying, let's not assume that Andy Murray will have a more successful career than those three. In terms of play style, Murray is pretty similar to Zverev and Medvedev. He's not so much like Tsitsipas. He's much more talented on the return and defense. When it comes to Zverev and Medvedev, all three of them actually have weaknesses on the second serve and weaknesses on the forehand. And they all have exceptional backhands, and they're all really good movers predicated on movement. I think Murray's got a better forehand than Medvedev to this point. I think Murray is a much better player mentally than Zverev, and a lot smarter tactically, way better point construction, better hands as well. So those are some differences between Murray and Zverev. Murray and Medvedev, I really do find them to be very similar. Right now, I'd take Murray's forehand over Medvedev by quite a distance. So from YIV, Daniil is a kind of player who, if something is not working great on the court, always tries to change something in his game and usually can get back in the match. But that wasn't the case in the finals. Still kind of unclear why that happened. Probably lots of reasons, but what do you think was the key factors? I think the key factor was that he did not want that smoke. And when I say that, I mean, I do not think he was ready to put in the work and suffer and go 4 or 5 sets. He felt the level that Djokovic was playing at. He understood how well that he would have needed to play in order to have success against Novak's level. And the calculation in your mind there is, how hard is this going to be? And am I willing to actually work that harder, or can my body take that? Am I going to be able to do this? And again, I think after the first set, I think he worked really, really, really hard. And I think he felt his gas tank was at a certain level that he didn't like very much, and he was down. So you start to make that calculation. How much do I have left? And wait a second, I still need to win 3 sets? I'm gonna either need to go 4 or 5? Oof. Daniil Medvedev panicked. What can you say? He panicked. There was a certain point where I don't think he was doing a lot of thinking on the court because he was feeling it physically. He was panicking mentally. Novak was not giving him anything to kind of give him any kind of extra hope or a second life. And he needed to win the first set, plain and simple. Medvedev had no chance at winning this match if he didn't win the first set, because he does not have the game to shorten points. He does not have the fitness to go 4 or 5 at the highest level of intensity that he needs against Novak, or he's not willing to suffer enough to go 4 or 5 sets against Novak at a high enough intensity. So you saw his game change. I don't agree with you that he kept doing the same thing. I think you saw his game change. He got less patient, and that just wasn't a winning plan. So I agree in some sense, but I fully agree. I don't think he was thinking out there. I think he was panicking. Let's not sugarcoat it. All right, next one from SJ. In Nadal's losses these last 2 years, he's lost mainly only to top 10 players. But in every match, it's felt like he's had so many opportunities to win. Besides against Schwartzman and Zverev in 2020, 2 bad matches. He lost 2 tiebreaks to Thiem, gave away that match against Medvedev, gave this one to Tsitsipas. He blew a love 40 lead and lost a tiebreak to Djokovic at the ATP Cup last year. Lost 3 tiebreaks against Thiem at Australian Open with multiple break advantages, and lost a tiebreak to Federer at Wimbledon in a tight 4-setter. I've noticed a trend in all 3 of these losses. He can hold serve easily and look absolutely dominant, but then the moment There are some high pressure. Then the moment there are some high pressure points or a tiebreak, he seems to start to feel exposed with no safe game plan. How can he really fix this? Is it mental, or do we just have to accept that Rafa has to take a more risky approach to the game nowadays, like Thiem and Federer do? Well, I think that Nadal was put in a pretty tough position when it came to his development, and he's reached a point where he's very comfortable playing a certain way against lower level competition when it comes to shortening points and playing kind of first strike tennis with his forehand off the serve. He has become comfortable there. But let's not forget that when Nadal was younger, I still thought he was a pretty offensive player. I think to call him a defensive player, I think would be pretty inaccurate. With that being said, when he really needed to clamp down in the pressure moments, he normally added margin, added topspin, safety, went into never miss mode, ran extra hard, made sure to hit forehands, and even if that meant using his footwork to get way into the deuce side of the court. So he played a certain way, working extra hard with his feet and making sure to never miss, and obviously defending his butt off. That was his reaction to the pressure. He always had his body. It was never going to be, Rafa was so nervous he couldn't move. No, never, right? He always had his movement. And ever since he's had to change his play style, you're seeing the results of that, where you're seeing identity crisis under pressure. Either he's not comfortable enough to execute and to play that high-risk, aggressive forehand when he needs it. And when I say high risk, I'm just saying, I guess I should maybe change that and say highly offensive, because I don't think that Nadal is like playing bad shot selection, which sometimes can be associated with high risk. So sometimes he's not comfortable playing that highly offensive forehand, or he misses it, or the highly offensive first serve, and he's had issues under pressure. This has been a very, very clear trend ever since he's kind of had to rely on his legs less in these pressure moments. So he needs to keep working at this. And I do think it's mostly mental, but it's also physical, because if he wasn't declining physically, he would not have to, he wouldn't be faced with this identity crisis in the first place. And again, it's easy for him when he's not under pressure. It's easy for him when he's not playing Djokovic, or he's not playing someone who can really push him a little bit harder. And we'll get more to this Australian Open loss to Tsitsipas in particular. But I think this was, that was a very physical loss. He lost because of his physicality, in my opinion. Yeah, he didn't win big points, but I think it was really tied to his conditioning. A good comment, and I think that by identifying the trend, you're doing plenty there. There's not, I added to it, but it's more just recognizing the trend, understanding how he used to play under pressure, understanding he can't play that way under pressure anymore, and then understanding that he's been less effective under pressure ever since he's had to adjust his style. That's really the framework there. All right, this one from Allison. Do you think it was unfair that TV commentators and the media were speculating about Djokovic faking an injury / engaging in gamesmanship in this tournament? And why do you think this happens more towards Djokovic compared to the other members of the Big Three? I can't help but think that if Nadal won the AO this year despite his back injury, or if Federer won AO last year despite his injury, they would be praised for overcoming adversity rather than attacked about their character and integrity. Well, I'm not going to address every single part of that comment. Like, I'm not going to address, the overarching theme of media bias or media favoritism towards Nadal and Federer. It's a massive topic that don't feel like undertaking. But I will engage with the first part, which is on Djokovic's injury. I think the big problem here was not enough people were willing to say, I don't know. I had a 49-minute analysis of Djokovic's win over Medvedev in the final. Not once did I bring up his oblique injury because it's completely irrelevant to me for the most part. I don't know much about it. I'm not going to harp on, how big the strain was and, how difficult it was. Now, from what I saw, it was astonishing what he was able to do, getting through the Taylor Fritz match and getting through the Milos Raonic match, and then starting to find his rhythm against Zverev in that quarterfinal after I still don't think he looked great in the first set, but then he really started looking good. From the semifinal and the final, I didn't think that it affected him, so I didn't feel the need to talk about it. But ultimately, not enough people were willing to say, I don't know. And if I'm going to critique, the media at large here, which I really don't like to do, I'd much rather people be specific here because we generalize about the media and it's like, what media? Do you mean people on Twitter? Do you mean newspaper writers? Do you mean commentators? That's why I really don't like it when we generalize the media. I'd much rather be specific. But if we're going to fall into that trap and we're going to say, what was the issue with people, how the Djokovic injury was covered. Well, the most important thing you can say is, I don't know. If you ask me, Gill, how impressive is it that Djokovic won the Australian Open with an abdominal injury? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I can tell it did not appear to bother him for the last two matches. That's what I can tell you. I can tell you it did appear to bother him for the matches that I mentioned previously. And he did a great job getting through those and serving incredibly well and, not giving up, which he could have. And that's it. You got to be able to say, I don't know sometimes. Have to. Next comment is from Priya. Many players who went deep in the tournaments right before the Australian Open crashed out early. Sinner, Struff, Evans, Auger-Aliassime. Did the lack of rest affect them? Do you think the quarantine was the reason why so many players, both men and women, were injured? There were especially a large number of ab injuries. Do you think that if tournaments cannot take place without a mandatory 14-day quarantine, then they shouldn't take place at all because the quality of matches were really poor in this Grand Slam when normally most players are healthy for the Aussie Open? I don't know that. Look, there were way too many injuries. It detracted from the event. There were countless matches that we were obviously kind of robbed of because of the quality of the event. And then, we saw some players seemingly unable to recover from long matches. There were a lot of issues. Let's not sugarcoat it. There were a ton of health issues. It did detract from the tournament. To address the whole 14-day quarantine thing, the answer is, if it's not a major, it's completely infeasible. The sacrifice is not worth the reward. So the only reason why Australia could make it work is because Australia is a major. And that's why it was worth it to go through the 14-day quarantine. These players get bigger paychecks at these 4 Grand Slams than they do anywhere else, even if they lose it in the first round. I'm talking about the lower level, tour level players. Specifically, okay? These players need to play majors. That's where they're that's where they're making the money. So that's why the quarantine worked. But the larger point is that players who went deep prior to the Aussie at the 250 events and the ATP Cup did not fare well at the major. And this was true for the US Open as well. If you look at the players who went deep at the Western and Southern the week prior, the reason why I selected this comment is because I think that the top players need to take a long, hard look at this. This is a clear trend to me. It's clear as day. The players who are making the final and playing into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then playing the major, in these bubble events, they are not doing well in the major. Now, for some of these players, take like a Dan Evans, a Jan Lennard Struff, and even a Jannik Sinner. For most of these players, actually, it's going to be probably worth it making a final or winning a title, perhaps. I think it's probably going to be worth it. FAA obviously got another crack at a final. He didn't win it, right? But, most of those players will probably take it, but there's gonna reach a certain point, a certain level on tour, and I think these players need to really look at what's happened at these two majors and really consider not playing the week before. There's a reason why Winston-Salem is not a strong field before the U.S. Open. There's a reason why John Isner, despite being from that area, played it for a lot of years, became frustrated with his U.S. Open results, and stopped playing it. It's not ideal to play the week before a major. And I think that players, the top players, really need to strongly, strongly consider sitting these events out. It's going to be hard because, and hopefully we don't need to deal with this again, because scheduling-wise, it's not normally like this. But if we do, it's really something to consider, because it's becoming pretty clear that you don't want to play too deep. If you're going to play a major the next week, then you might want to lose. You might not want to go to the second week, you might not want to go to the weekend in your warm-up event the week prior. All right, now we're on to the Twitter questions. New Day says, you've expressed some skepticism regarding Medvedev's ability to replicate his scorching hot 2019 summer run and his ability to remain in the top 5 for the foreseeable future. Do you now believe he is by far the best of the rest, or at the very least on par with Thiem? I still don't believe that, and I don't believe that I don't believe I've been proven wrong about Medvedev. I think that my concern with Medvedev, and concern is too strong a word. Here's my direct quote. Here's what I said about Daniil, and I think it still applies. I said, don't pump the brakes on Daniil Medvedev. Just tap them. That's what I said after the 2019 summer run. That's what I said going into 2020. Look, Daniil's a very good player. Very, very good. He can do incredible things in his career. His assets are unlike anything I've ever seen. But there are also issues. That's it. I stand by that. And those issues manifest themselves in surface versatility issues. He is so far in his career, a very surface-dependent player who I believe shows very clear reasoning behind that. So, for example, Naomi Osaka has had all her great results on hardcourt. She has not been good on clay. She has not had the chance to really be great on grass, but she's a player who, to me, it's going to click on the other surfaces. I think that's pretty evident, because I just don't see a lot of reason why it won't. But Medvedev, there are clear technical things going on that are going to really hinder him. The slower a surface gets and the higher bouncing a surface gets, the worse he is going to be. And there are just that just has to do with clear technical flaws that he has, or technical weaknesses. So let's see how he does. Right now, every single tournament in the entire calendar that is either on indoor hard or is on a somewhat speedy hardcourt, Daniil Medvedev has done exceptionally well on. And he had a shortened clay court season last year. Didn't really have the time to build himself up there. But again, showed some vulnerability. And obviously there hasn't been grass court season. I think he's going to be really good on grass. And I'm a fan of him on Wimbledon, for Wimbledon rather. But we got to see, I have questions about him on slower, high bouncing surfaces. I have questions about him in best of 5 against elite opponents when he faces adversity. That's it. So, the question, do you believe he is by far the best of the rest, or at least on par with Thiem? Yeah, I do believe that he is, pretty much on par with Thiem. Not quite. I'd say a fraction below Thiem. But I don't think he's really separated himself all that much. I don't. I think on a fast hard court, he is unbelievable. He's tremendous. But let's just remember, my critiques of Medvedev are not what he can do on a fast hard court. I think there is no disputing what he can do on a fast low bouncing court. So let's see how he does on the other surfaces. And then there's going to be the major hump, which is the same hump that Thiem, had to knock on the door for a couple years with, and arguably is still in some way has more hurdles to overcome. Obviously, I'm not taking anything away from him, but I think he'll still, before he retires, he'll want to have that big win over Djokovic, Nadal, or to a lesser extent Federer in a major final. I think Thiem will still want that before he retires. So, he's still going for that one. Medvedev still needs to clear that hurdle. And we saw I think that there are some significant steps that he needs to take before he'll be ready to do that. From Jeff, question, what specifically could Medvedev do to improve his game on clay, and how good could he reasonably get on clay, in your opinion? If he did, what would you, how good could he reasonably get on clay, in your opinion, if he did what you recommended? Oh, I get it. I see what you're saying. Well, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's going to be an uphill battle, because there would have to be a somewhat drastic change in the dynamic of his forehand and just the way that shot is deployed. And from a technical standpoint, you take a quirky shot like the Daniil Medvedev forehand, quirky technique. The result is that he doesn't love to generate pace. So how is that going to change? On a slower surface, when he doesn't have as much pace to work with, and when it's a court surface that's more difficult to hit through, that doesn't really take well to his flat hitting, and generally forces him to hit balls sometimes above his shoulder where he's a little bit weaker. All those things together makes his forehand a much bigger problem, a much bigger weakness than it is on other surfaces, than it is on a quick surface. How likely is that forehand to really change? Man, I mean, is Borna Coric, who's always had kind of a forehand technique that was always kind of too long and just wasn't good on quicker surfaces because he gets rushed on that side, or Karen Khachanov's forehand, which has the same issue. Too long, Western grip, difficult to play with on fast surfaces. These things are really hard to change. Really hard to change. So I think for Daniil Medvedev to improve his game on clay, I think he needs to get physically stronger, because I don't see his technique changing. I don't think it should change, because there are some positive aspects to how he hits the ball. He's still consistent. He still has really good depth. His ball stays really, really low. These are good things. His forehand isn't just bad. That would not be a proper blanket to place on his forehand. His forehand has very, very specific shortcomings that are exacerbated on slow surfaces. In order for those things to change, I do think that he just needs to get stronger. Just needs to get stronger. Because I don't see the technique changing, and I don't think it should change. So that's the short answer. From Sedan, after that heartbreaking loss to Coric in the U.S. Open, Tsitsipas has now made back-to-back Grand Slam semifinals on two different surfaces. Do you think this is the year when he starts consistently making semis and finals in Grand Slams? I've always thought that it was a no-brainer that we were going to get to this point for Tsitsipas. He has always had a dangerous enough game to challenge anyone in the world. He just wasn't playing big points well, but he wanted it so bad. He was an analytical guy. He has good character. He had a strong will. He has a strong will to be great and accomplish big things in this sport. So it was always easy for me to have faith in him and to back him. And my answer to this is yes. I think that he is going to get there. I think the consistency is on its way. I think it's very close to happening. I don't see any reason to argue the other way. It's mostly mental for him. He might run into some bad matchups. I think big servers could still bother him in a big way. There are still going to be matches where he's not putting his return in the court, and it's going to be very frustrating for him. But other than that, especially if he gets the right draw at these Grand Slams, and then on clay, I think he's becomes more indestructible. And I think at the U.S. Open, I'd expect big things out of him as well. I expect to see consistency out of Tsitsipas. Here's one from Kozlov. Huge bit from the post-match press conference with very little coverage. Novak said that now that he secured his spot on most weeks number 1, he will now be revising his schedule to favor even more Grand Slams. Which and how many Masters 1000s will he play this year? Ooh, that was a much-needed sip of water. I don't want to predict his schedule, really, but he's going to really prioritize the Olympics, as I said earlier. Every indication has suggested that he's going to do that. Even playing Tokyo in 2019, and just as much as he's just said it, it's the missing piece for him. He's going to prioritize that. So keep that in mind as well with these Masters 1000s. But I mostly included this comment because I do think that it's an interesting bit from the press conference, and it is something to keep an eye on. So remember, he has won every Masters 1000 event. So I think he'll probably want to finish with more Masters titles than Nadal and Federer. I do think that could motivate him. That's kind of another race, and right now he is there, right? Sorry if I don't have that right, but I'm pretty sure he's there. See, that just goes to show you the things I'm mostly focused on. But yeah, let's see what he does. Couple more here. This one from Mason. Do you see Djokovic in search of slams in late age, following the footsteps of Nadal and Federer with more aggressive ground strokes, more frequent net play, to go along with bigger and more accurate serves, or will he remain the prototypical baseliner for the rest of his career? I would say we're already seeing these things. 100% we're already seeing these things. The big difference, you might say, well, Djokovic is still grinding. And I can show you 20 points against Medvedev in the Australian Open final where Novak is grinding with Medvedev. And he looks like someone who's wants to dig in and outlast. I can show you 20 points, but he's not doing it point in and point out anymore. He can't. He doesn't want to. He's not interested in it. He shouldn't be interested in it. That's the difference between a 2015 to 2011 version of Novak Djokovic and now. It's not that Novak can't play a long rally now. It's not that when he's not in great shape and highly motivated that he can't do some grinding. Of course he can. But is he going to do it every point? Can he do it 3 points in a row? Can he do it 7 out of 10 points? No. He's not doing that anymore. He has it in his back pocket, and that's good. But ultimately, we are already seeing the transformation of his game. We are already seeing him shorten points and change the way he plays. I think that there is more aggression in his game on a shot-by-shot basis. I think the rally aggression is simply higher. But most of all, it is the serve to go along with the forehand. And I think the one thing that Djokovic will really be embracing is the big second serve. I know that Novak has a great admiration for Pete Sampras, and I think that you can draw a lot of parallels between Djokovic and Sampras, and that is one thing that Pete did later in his career, to not only play, obviously, the short points off the first serve. That's easy. That comes naturally. But the way that Pete started to take some pressure off himself was to go a little bit bigger on the second serve and to train himself to do that. I think that Djokovic has made an effort over the course of the last 2 years to do that. I think we saw that in this tournament, not so much against Medvedev, but against other players. And I do believe we will continue to see that. The drop shots were a huge storyline last year. Look, that will still be a part of his game, and he will use that to shorten points. The Federer short chip cross court is one that he's enjoyed against players like RBA and Medvedev, who he doesn't really want to trade backhands with. So we are going to see it. Here's the question. The question is Novak going to add power? And I'm not, like he's added it in his serve, and that's going to be the X factor. If he can add power, that can really change the calculus for him when it comes to even what he can do on clay, in my opinion. And, will he develop an even greater ability to use the forehand as a means of early offense? That will be interesting for me to see. I'm not sure. I'm not quite positive about that. Excuse me. I feel a sneeze coming on here. Oh, maybe not. I'm going to try to get through this comment. It's in need of an internship. What a Twitter name. Somebody give this man an internship. Do you think Nadal is done in hardcourt slams? His body almost always breaks down in hardcourt slams over the past 2 to 3 years. And what is the significance of Stefanos beating Nadal in best of 5 in the broader overview of Nadal's career? I'm glad we're getting to the last part of this question, because I'm throwing this one out. I don't think we should read into this one. Let us not forget the circumstances here. Let us not forget that Nadal played 0 matches coming into this tournament because he couldn't, because his back was not good enough to play ATP Cup. And that means that if he was not healthy enough to play practice matches, if he was not healthy enough to play real matches, then he wasn't healthy enough to play practice matches at 100%, which means that he was not playing at 100% intensity leading up to this tournament. And it was incredibly strange to see Nadal tire as quickly as he did against Tsitsipas. He is generally in better condition. So this was an exception to the rule. This was an outlier. My conclusion is that Nadal was not ready to be his best at the 2020 Australian Open, and he fought incredibly hard against Tsitsipas. Credit to Nadal for playing so well, really, in the final 2 sets against Stefanos, and serving really well, and playing good first strike forehands, +1 forehands, I should say. Credit to him for doing that, to almost mask the physical condition that he was in. He really did almost mask it. And it was not, clear as day. And he still played good tennis. And he could have beaten Tsitsipas at the level he was playing. Credit to Stefanos for playing too well to allow Nadal to kind of grit his way through that match. But he did not have what he would normally have there. And normally it takes a lot more for Nadal to get physically tired. So I take 0 significance out of Nadal's loss to Tsitsipas here. I think it's great for Tsitsipas, but Nadal wasn't ready to win this tournament coming in. He just wasn't. Medvedev, I'm fairly confident would have beaten him in the semifinal. Fairly confident. All right, we will end on this one from Dude. When do you think we're going to see new faces going deep at Wimbledon, and who will they be? Man, I almost feel like this is it's kind of early to be talking about this, because now I'm sure I'll get asked the same question in 2 months. Medvedev has been my answer to this question for a really long time. I think it's very, very unfair to kind of say like, hey, what's going on with the Zverev, Tsitsipas, Medvedev, and Rublev generation? Why aren't they doing well on grass? What's happening here? I just don't think that's fair because they didn't even get last year to remedy that. And a lot of them, Zverev notwithstanding, who has been at kind of the same level now for years and years and years. Zverev notwithstanding, I don't think that's really fair to those guys. But I will say that I think that Medvedev can be exceptional at Wimbledon. I think that Andrei Rublev can be exceptional at Wimbledon with what he brings on the serve and the forehand side, his compact strokes and his tendency to take the ball early, and the way that he thrives in the fast-paced baseline game. I really like the Russians at Wimbledon, and that's who I'm really looking forward to seeing. All right, let's do a quick tease of the content, and then I will wrap up. Obviously, Monday Match Analysis, a 49-minute breakdown, in-depth, the most in-depth on the internet, of Djokovic's victory over Daniil Medvedev. What went down in that match? Why did it play out the way it played out in such one-sided fashion? On Wednesday, I spoke with Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink of tennis.com. That was a great conversation, about 45 minutes. Great for podcast platforms as well. Steve is tremendous, and we really covered everything on the men's side of the 2021 Australian Open. So remember that Monday Match Analysis, in addition to the Mailbag, is available on all podcast platforms. Leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for getting me to 8,000 subscribers. Appreciate all the support and appreciate all you guys just in general. That will do it for Australian Open coverage in 2021. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.